Have you ever dealt with a petty tyrant? Someone who gets a tiny taste of power and suddenly thinks they're a king ruling over their own little fiefdom? I have. For me, it was my homeowners association president, a man named Arthur Henderson, and his kingdom was a quiet suburban development called Willow Creek. My crime, in his eyes, was wanting to build a small 8 by 10-foot garden shed in my own backyard. A shed that was, I might add, fully compliant with the city's building codes. But it wasn't compliant with Henderson's unwritten code of absolute authority. The dispute started small, with a snide email, then escalated to a formal notice of violation, when I calmly pointed out the section in the HOA bylaws that permitted such structures with a simple notification. He unilaterally decided to reinterpret the rule. The argument culminated in an act of petty warfare so extreme it was almost unbelievable. I woke up one Tuesday morning, turned on the faucet to make coffee, and got nothing but a sad, gurgling gasp from the pipes. They had shut off my water. My wife and I stood in the silent kitchen, stunned. This wasn't just a fine or a nasty letter. This was a direct attack on our ability to live in our own home. What Henderson and his board of sycophants didn't know was that I wasn't just a guy who liked to garden. My day job for the past 15 years had been as a paralegal specializing in real estate and land use. They thought they were turning off a tap, but what they had really done was open a floodgate of legal and strategic scrutiny that would sweep them and their petty kingdom completely away. Have you ever been pushed so far that your only option was to push back with everything you had? This is the story of how I took on a power-mad HOA. Not with anger, but with research, a deep dive into dusty county records, and a single, perfectly legal real estate transaction that put the fate of the entire neighborhood and Mr. Henderson's throne directly into my hands. My first move wasn't rage, but reason. It's always the best place to start, though with men like Henderson, it's rarely where things end. I drafted a calm, professional letter citing the specific state statutes that prohibit an HOA from terminating essential services like water over a covenant dispute. That the tool reserved for non-payment of dues, and even then, it requires multiple notices and a formal hearing. I had received neither. I attached a copy of my paid-in-full dues statement and sent the letter via certified mail. I expected a grudging apology and the water to be turned back on within a day. Instead, I received an email from Henderson himself. It was a masterpiece of condescending arrogance. He claimed the board held an emergency vote via email, which was dubious at best, and declared my unapproved structure a sanitary and safety hazard, thereby justifying the water shutoff under a vague, catch-all provision in the bylaws. The fines, he added, were now accruing at $50 a day. He was digging in, making it clear this was about dominance, not bylaws. That night, my wife and I had to shower at a friend's house. It was humiliating. We were living like squatters in our own mortgaged home, all because one man's ego had been bruised. That's when the frustration hardened into cold, methodical determination. I knew fighting him head-on at an HOA meeting would be fruitless. He controlled the board, and he would frame the narrative to make me look like the unreasonable one. I couldn't win on his turf, playing by his rigged rules. I needed to change the game entirely. I needed to find a different kind of leverage, something he wasn't aware of, something he couldn't control. So, I retreated to my home office, surrounded by bottled water and simmering resolve, and I started to dig. My work had taught me that every piece of land has a story, written in deeds, plats, and surveys. HOAs, in particular, are creatures of paper. Their power is derived entirely from the documents that created them. I started with the master plat for the Willow Creek development, a sprawling map from the late 1980s that laid out every lot, road, and common area. I spent hours tracing lines, cross-referencing parcel numbers with the county assessor's online database. It was tedious, mind-numbing work. For the first few hours, everything seemed in order. The roads, the little park, the greenbelt behind my house, all were designated as common area, owned and managed by the Willow Creek Homeowners Association Incorporated. But then I saw it. It was a tiny anomaly, easily missed. Right in the geographic center of the largest common green space, there was a small, square plot about a quarter of an acre that was shaded differently. It had its own distinct parcel number that didn't match the surrounding HOA land. It was a carve-out, an island of private property in a sea of common ground. My pulse quickened. Why would the developer do that? I pulled up the satellite view. The square was covered in trees, but in the middle was a small, unassuming building with a gravel path leading to it. It was the pump house for the community well. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I toggled back to the assessor's map. The parcel was labeled 7B. The owner was listed not as the HOA, but as Oak Ridge Development, LLC. This was the original developer. A quick search on the Secretary of State's website told me that Oak Ridge Development had been formally dissolved in 1995. The developer had passed away years ago. Henderson and the HOA were operating the well, maintaining it, and using it as their primary weapon, all while assuming they owned it. But the records, the black and white legal truth of the matter, said they didn't. They were, in a legal sense, trespassers on a piece of land they didn't control. And that's when the first spark of a truly audacious idea ignited in my mind. The discovery of Parcel 7B was the key, but I had to be absolutely certain. A dissolved LLC can't own property. Its assets are typically distributed to its members or heirs upon dissolution. This was the loose thread I needed to pull. I spent the next 2 days, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose, tracing the lineage of Oak Ridge Development. It took me deep into probate court records and corporate filings, a world of digital dust and forgotten legal notices. I finally found what I was looking for: the certificate of dissolution and the final distribution of assets. The developer, a man named Gerald Finney, had been the sole member of the LLC. Upon his death, his estate, including all residual real and personal property, passed to his only child, a daughter named Eleanor Vance. Eleanor, as it turned out, was now 84 years old and living in a retirement community in Sedona, Arizona. There was the well that supplied water to all 200 homes in Willow Creek. The well that Arthur Henderson was wielding like a scepter was legally owned by an elderly woman 3 states away who almost certainly had no idea it even existed. It was likely an oversight, a tiny parcel forgotten during the complex process of developing and handing over the community decades ago. To her, it would just be a name on a long list of her late father's assets, a quarter acre of what probably looked like useless, landlocked green space on paper. To me, it was everything. It was the high ground. It was the entire chessboard. Henderson thought he was the king, but he was just a pawn playing on a board he didn't own, and I had just found the owner's name and address. My mind started racing, the frustration and anger of the past week transforming into the clear, cold logic of a winning strategy. I wasn't just going to get my water turned back on. I was going to buy the well. The plan formed quickly, each piece clicking into place with satisfying precision. This couldn't be a brute force attack. It had to be a quiet, legal, and unassailable transaction. The first step was to approach Eleanor Vance, but I couldn't do it myself. It needed to feel professional and routine, not like a desperate move from a homeowner in a feud. I contacted a real estate attorney I'd worked with before, a sharp woman named Sarah who relished unconventional deals. I laid out the entire situation for her: the HOA, Henderson, the water shutoff, and my discovery of Parcel 7B. She listened intently, a slow grin spreading across her face. "Mark," she said, "this is the most beautiful case of corporate oversight I've ever seen. It's a landlocked, non-conforming parcel with no road access. On paper, it's worthless to anyone but an adjacent property owner, which in this case is the HOA, and since the HOA didn't even know they needed to own it, they weren't a competitor. We drafted an offer. We couldn't lowball it so much that it raised suspicion, so we offered $5,000. It was a fair price for a forgotten, seemingly unusable plot of land, but an absolute steal for the keys to the kingdom. Sarah made the call on my behalf, framing it perfectly. She explained to Mrs. Vance that a client was looking to clean up some remnant parcels in the area, and her name had come up as the owner of this small plot. Sarah was careful not to mention the well or the water. We had no legal obligation to disclose the nature of the assets on the land we were offering to buy. We were simply offering to purchase a specific parcel ID, as is. Mrs. Vance was, by all accounts, delighted. She remembered her father's business being complicated and was happy to be rid of one more piece of paperwork and property taxes she didn't know she was paying. While we waited for her to sign and return the purchase agreement, Henderson and the HOA remained blissfully ignorant. They continued to send me daily notices about my fines, each email dripping with smug satisfaction. He had no idea that I wasn't even reading them anymore. I was too busy planning my first moves as the future owner of Willow Creek's water supply. The next 2 weeks were masterclass in patience. Every day felt like a year as the paperwork made its way from Arizona back to my attorney's office. My wife and I continued our routine of buying gallon jugs of water, a constant, humbling reminder of what was at stake. Henderson, meanwhile, was growing more brazen. He had a notice posted on the community bulletin board, not naming me, but clearly about me, warning residents against unauthorized modifications that threaten community infrastructure. He was solidifying his narrative, painting himself as the vigilant protector of Willow Creek. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, the call came from Sarah. "We're closed," she said. "The deed was recorded with the county clerk an hour ago. Parcel 7B is officially yours." A wave of relief and adrenaline washed over me. I hung up the phone and just sat there for a moment, the signed deed in my email inbox glowing on the screen. It was done. I was now the legal, undisputed owner of the land, the pump house, the well, and every pipe leading out of it to the main distribution valve. The first thing I did was call a licensed water systems engineering firm and a bonded security company. I was no longer just a homeowner. I was the proprietor of a private water utility, and I needed to act like one. The next morning, a Saturday, my small team assembled at the edge of the green space. We walked across the common area, our footsteps on the dew-covered grass feeling like a march into enemy territory. We arrived at the unassuming pump house. The lock on the door was a standard, flimsy model from a hardware store. My security guy had it cut off in less than 10 seconds. We stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of damp concrete and ozone from the electrical panel. The hum of the pump was the sound of my newfound leverage. We spent the next hour inspecting the equipment. The engineer confirmed the system was sound and showed me the main shut-off valve, a large, red wheel that controlled the flow of water to the entire neighborhood. I had new, high-grade security locks installed on the door and a large, professionally printed private property. No trespassing. Authorized personnel only sign affixed to the front. As we were finishing up, one of Henderson's board members, a nosy woman named Carol, jogged by and stopped. "What's going on here?" she asked, her tone accusatory. "Just inspecting my property," I said calmly, holding up a freshly printed copy of my deed. Her face went through a remarkable series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning panic. She scurried away, phone already in her hand. The first shot had been fired, and I hadn't even had to raise my voice. The whispers started immediately. Carol, true to form, had clearly run straight to Henderson. Within an hour, I could see neighbors peering out their windows, talking on their porches, pointing toward the green space. The rumor mill was in full swing. By late afternoon, I received a frantic, sputtering email from Henderson. "Mr. Peterson, it has come to my attention that you have trespassed on HOA property and tampered with the community well. Cease and desist immediately. The authorities have been notified of your vandalism." I chuckled and deleted the email without replying. He was still operating from a false premise, a foundation of ignorance that was about to crumble beneath his feet. He had no authority here. The authorities, if they checked the county records as I had, would simply tell him it was a civil matter concerning private property. My property. The tension built over Sunday. I let them stew. I let the fear and confusion marinate throughout the neighborhood. My wife was nervous, asking if I was sure about this. "They're going to say you're a monster," she said. "Let them," I replied. "A monster is just a story people tell when they don't understand the full picture. They're about to see the full picture on Monday morning. I made my move. I didn't send an angry email or make a threatening call. I had my attorney, Sarah, draft a formal letter. It was sent via courier to the official address of the Willow Creek HOA. It was a beautiful, terrifyingly simple document. It began, Utility Service Agreement for Willow Creek Development. It politely informed the board that as the new legal owner of Parcel 7B, including all appurtenances and equipment thereon, I was establishing a new entity, the Clear Creek Water Company, to manage the asset. It stated that continued water service would require the HOA to enter into a formal utility agreement with my company. Then came the masterstroke. I laid out the terms. The monthly fee for the water was actually quite reasonable based on market rates. But the agreement was subject to several conditions precedent, which had to be met before any long-term contract could be executed. Condition number 1. The immediate and unconditional cancellation of all fines and rescission of all violation notices levied against my property at Lot 42. Condition number 2. A formal, written apology from the board for the illegal termination of my water service. And condition number 3. The immediate, formal resignation of Mr. Arthur Henderson as president and as a member of the board of directors. I gave them a deadline of 48 hours to return a signed letter of intent. If they failed to do so, I would have no choice but to commence service interruptions to protect the integrity and operational capacity of my private equipment. I wasn't shutting off their water. I was simply declining to provide a service for which we had no contract. It was legal, airtight, and checkmate. The letter landed like a bomb. I can only imagine the scene in Henderson's house as he read it. The sheer, sputtering rage. The disbelief turning to horror as his own attorney, whom he undoubtedly called in a panic, would have confirmed the legal reality. I held all the cards. His power, which was based entirely on the illusion of his control over the community's resources, had vanished overnight. As predicted, he called an emergency community meeting for the following evening. The email blast was frantic, filled with words like hostage situation, extortion, and attack on our community. He was trying to frame me as the villain, his last and only move. The meeting was held in the small community clubhouse. The room was packed, buzzing with anxiety and anger. My wife and I walked in and took seats in the back. A wave of hostile glares washed over us. Henderson stood at the front, his face flushed and blotchy. He launched into a tirade, painting a picture of a rogue homeowner attempting to hold the entire neighborhood for ransom. He waved my attorney's letter in the air like a captured enemy flag. "This man," he bellowed, pointing at me, "wants to charge you for water that has been yours for 30 years. He is trying to destroy Willow Creek." When he finished, the room erupted in angry shouts directed at me. I let it wash over me, and then I calmly stood up and walked to the front, carrying my laptop. I had come prepared. I connected my computer to the projector Henderson had been using. The first image that flashed on the screen was the official county plat map, with a small, brightly colored square of Parcel 7B clearly visible. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Mark Peterson. Mr. Henderson is correct that I now control the well. What he failed to mention is why." I clicked to the next slide, a copy of the deed to the common areas in the HOA's name. Then I clicked again, showing the deed to Parcel 7B, clearly listing Oak Ridge Development, LLC. For 30 years, the HOA has been operating on land they do not own. The water you've been using has been supplied by equipment that did not belong to you. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I then showed them the deed with my name on it. I purchased this land legally. It was an asset forgotten by the original developer. I let the reality of the situation sink in before I continued. The anger in the room was slowly being replaced by confusion, and then by a dawning understanding. I looked directly at the crowd, making eye contact with my neighbors. "I want to be very clear," I said, my voice resonating with sincerity. "I never wanted to own a well. I wanted to build a garden shed. I was a quiet member of this community who paid his dues and followed the rules. But when I followed the rules, your president, Mr. Henderson, decided to change them to assert his personal authority." I clicked to the next slide, displaying the chain of increasingly aggressive emails from Henderson, culminating in the notice that he was shutting off our water. Gasps went through the room. Many of them had only heard his side of the story. This was never about a shed, I continued. It was about a man who was willing to cut off a family's water supply, a potential health and safety emergency, over a petty disagreement. He abused his power in a way that put my family at risk. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. So yes, I took action. I did my research, and I used my own money to legally secure the asset that Mr. Henderson was using as his personal weapon. I did it to protect myself, and frankly, to protect all of you from this kind of unchecked overreach happening again. I then put up the slide with my conditions. I'm not extorting you. The water service agreement I've proposed is fair, but it requires that the man who created this crisis be removed from power. My only condition for a stable, long-term water contract is the resignation of Arthur Henderson. The tables had turned completely. The crowd was no longer looking at me with anger. They were looking at Henderson, their faces a mixture of betrayal and fury. He was sputtering, trying to object, but his voice was drowned out by a homeowner in the front row who stood up and shouted, "Is this true, Arthur? Did you really shut his water off over a shed?" Henderson's face went white. He had no answer. The narrative had crumbled, his authority shattered. He wasn't the king protecting his castle. He was the court jester who had been exposed as a fool, and the entire kingdom was laughing at him. The downfall was swift and brutal. The aftermath of that meeting was a complete realignment of power in Willow Creek. Henderson, publicly humiliated and stripped of his authority, had no choice but to resign. He submitted a short, terse email the next morning, and his forced sale sign went up less than a month later. The remaining board members, humbled and eager to restore stability, quickly agreed to my terms. They issued a formal, written apology, which I accepted, and all fines and violations against me were wiped from the record. We signed a fair and equitable water utility service agreement, ensuring the community would have reliable water for the foreseeable future. A special election was held, and a new HOA board was formed, composed of reasonable people who understood that their job was to maintain property values, not to wage personal vendettas. My shed was built the following weekend, a small, triumphant monument to the victory of reason over tyranny. But I knew that holding the water supply gave me a level of power that no single homeowner should have. So, my final move was to create the Willow Creek Water Trust. I worked with my attorney to place Parcel 7B and the well into a nonprofit trust, managed by a 3-person board of community members. The trust charter was simple: to operate and maintain the water system for the sole benefit of the residents, at cost. It could never be used as a tool of coercion again. I had taken the power not to keep it, but to give it back to the community in a safer, more equitable form. I learned a valuable lesson through all of this. Petty tyrants like Henderson thrive in the shadows of apathy and ignorance. They count on people not reading the fine print, not questioning the source of their authority. But their power is often a house of cards, built on a shaky foundation that can be toppled by a single person willing to do the research and expose the truth. I never wanted to fight, but being pushed into one forced me to discover a strength and strategic resolve I never knew I had. Justice isn't always delivered by a court. Sometimes it's delivered by a well-researched property deed. So let me ask you, what seemingly small injustice have you witnessed that might have a much bigger, hidden vulnerability just waiting to be discovered?